You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. Earlier this week, a fire ravaged a mixed-use building on Portage Avenue, closing the busy street to traffic for 2 days as crews battled the blaze. The historic West End building, the Kirkland Block, was built in 1912 and beginning in the late 1950s became home to Club Morocco, a popular nightclub operated by Harry Smith. For over 3 decades, it was a swinging spot on the second story, featuring plenty of live music and renowned entertainers. And to tell us a little bit more about the former Club Morocco, veteran Winnipeg musician and educator Owen Clark has joined me. Hello, Owen.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Well, it's really nice to have you here, and thanks so much for doing this. I'd like to begin by asking you about your reaction when you heard the news that the Kirkland Block building was in flames.
Memories, tons of memories, just of the time that I spent there, not only as a performing musician, but also it was a great place for after hours. Harry had food available, so he could stay open until 2 a.m., whereas the rest of the clubs closed at 1. So it was a great place to meet all the musicians who were just finishing up a gig or perhaps coming off a show at CBC, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it was a late night spot, open till 2. Very different liquor laws back then. It was certainly before my time, certainly of a different era, and like you say, a lot of memories coming flooding back. When you first think Club Morocco, though, is there one image that really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, when I first went there in 1959, actually, I was there a year earlier. I must correct myself. I was there in 1958 as a client, patron. I was working for the Burns Meat Company, and they had their Christmas celebration at the Club Morocco. And so we went and danced and ate and drank. And I felt very special because I knew Del Wagner, the drummer. So I had a connection to the band. So that was a big deal for me that night.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was, and just some legends that played there, and you yourself, as you say, played there. It became a pretty regular gig, I imagine. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Al Sprints Band and others that you played with at Club Morocco?
The Al Sprints Band, yes. Al had a revolving band of musicians, and the constant was Al, and the second constant was Bob Jackson on bass. The accordion players, the piano players, um, the drummers rotated in and out on a regular basis because they got a show on CBC or they got a better gig somewhere. And when that gig ended, they'd all come back, work at the Morocco again. I went in there doing the same kind of thing, subbing in for somebody, I don't even remember who now, in 66 with Al's band. And again in the late 70s with Moose Jackson's band. And he ran the band the same way Al did. He was the leader, he was always there, and his musicians just rotated in and out 6 nights a week.
6 nights a week. That's a pretty busy gig.
Yeah, yeah, you were there from, in the beginning, I believe there was music from um, 7 to 8, and then from 9 till 1. So the musicians had an hour off between 8 and 9, and then they'd be back to play dance music from 9 till 1, and usually a show at 10 o'clock and at midnight with a visiting guest artist.
Wow, talk about a golden age in dance band music. I mean, that just
Yes.
the party really just didn't stop. That's wild.
Yep.
Now,
Great fun.
yeah, I'm sure that it was. I also want to ask you. I mean, you mentioned Harry Smith, the impresario, the owner of the club. He passed away back in 1998, 1997, thereabouts, I think it was. Sounds like a really interesting fellow, a stickler for a formal dress code. Is that right?
Yes. Harry didn't like to have a club full of people in just shirts or whatever. So he insisted on everybody wearing a jacket. And his brother Earl was the maitre d' at the door. And if you didn't have a jacket, Earl had a rack of these old smelly jackets in the cloakroom, and he would loan you a jacket so you could go in and eat and drink.
Oh, no way. That is, I can only imagine the stories those jackets could tell.
Yes.
Now, one other thing that I'm wondering about, I mean, obviously this was a pretty happening spot, and I imagine there were some pretty big names that rolled through town and performed on the stage. Who do you remember seeing, or maybe even playing with at Club Morocco?
Um, there's a myth surrounding that. The acts that Harry brought in were sort of mid-range acts that were on the circuit, traveling across Canada, usually coming up from Chicago or Minneapolis. So there was just tons of them.
Yeah.
Singers, magicians, accordion players, duets, guitar players, dancers, whatever. The myth is that Benny Goodman, Count Basie, and Duke Ellington played there. They didn't play there. They were playing in town. And they came to the Morocco because they heard about it as being the place where the musicians went to meet. And they would finish their gig and then come to the Morocco to have a drink and have some food and meet the local musicians. So that's the kind of place it was. You never knew who was going to be there. The acts weren't famous, so you went there and read the music and played the show.
Yeah, it really sounds like it was a musicians club then.
It was definitely.
Wow. Well, Owen, thank you so much for taking us down a little trip down memory lane here. This was really enlightening.
Right.